In the summer of 490 BC, a Persian fleet was headed towards the coast of Greece. After putting down the rebels of the Ionian Revolt, King Darius was determined to seek revenge against those involved in it and consolidate his power in mainland Europe by incorporating all of Greece into his domain. Few Greek city-states dared to take a stand against the incoming Persian army, with the king of Macedon being a vassal of Darius and the vast majority of Greek city-states submitting to Persian demands. It was only the Athenians, Erythraeans, and the Peloponnesian League led by Sparta who were preparing for the upcoming invasion. Before examining the events that led to the greco-persian clash at Marathon, as well as the battle itself, it is important to clarify a few points about what we actually know about the battle and how much of it is based on speculation. The main ancient source about the battle comes from Herodotus, which creates several potential issues regarding its credibility. Putting Herodotus' reputation aside, it is undeniable that he, being Greek himself, would describe the conflict from a Greek point of view and with an inherent Greek bias. The Battle of Marathon would become a central pivot in pro-Athenian propaganda in order to leverage the city's political position on the Greek peninsula for many years to come, and it is likely that Herodotus' description of the events contributed to this fact. Furthermore, Herodotus wrote his histories in the second half of the 5th century BC, several decades after the battle, interviewing the descendants of the men who fought at Marathon to gather information, with other historians such as Plutarch writing about the events centuries later. This being said, most modern historians agree that while Herodotus has a tendency to exaggerate some details for dramatic effect, his descriptions of events are for the most part accurate, and we have at least a decent idea about what happened at Marathon. The Persian expedition of 490 BC was led by two experienced Persian generals named Darius and Artaphernes. While the army's main strategic goal was reaching the cities of Erythraea and Athens and razing them, the Persian fleet did not head directly towards mainland Greece. Leaving from the coast of Cilicia, the Achaemenid army had some unfinished business in the Aegean to tend to. Their first stop was the island of Rhodes, where they unsuccessfully besieged the city of Lindus. Next, they headed towards Naxos in order to seek revenge for the disastrous campaign a decade earlier, besieging the city and razing it. Next were the islands of Delos and the city of Charistos. After hearing of the fall of Naxos, the Delians submitted to the Persians and were spared total annihilation. The fate of the people of Charistos was different, as they unsuccessfully tried to resist the Persian invasion, and their city was also razed to the ground. Before approaching their final and biggest rival in Athens, the Achaemenid fleet had one more stop to make. The city of Erythraea was besieged with heavy siege weapons. The Erythraeans were ready to valiantly defend their city, receiving aid in the form of hoplites from their Athenian allies. Nevertheless, the constant bombardment by heavy Persian siege weapons proved too much for the Erythraeans to handle, and the city eventually fell into Achaemenid control. The fate of Erythraea was certain. The city was completely destroyed and its population sold into slavery. The only obstacle keeping Darius from total domination in Greece was the city of Athens. Prior to embarking on their expedition to Greece, the Persians had built a solid spy network to be aware of the political situation in Greece. In addition to this, they were able to gather information about the terrain and choose a perfect landing site for their army. The coast of Marathon was an obvious choice, as it was located in close proximity to the city of Athens, and it provided the perfect conditions for landing a large-sized army, which required a great amount of planning and coordination in the ancient world. The Athenians, on the other hand, were also aware of the movements of the Persian fleet, and they were fully aware that the Achaemenid army was to disembark at Marathon. Once news of an approaching Persian fleet reached Athens, the defense plan of the city came into full effect. As was standard in times of war, every Athenian citizen of fighting age was mobilized and prepared to fight. 10 generals were designated to lead the Athenian troops into battle, the most notorious of which was a commander named Miltiades, who had decades of combat experience. The tactical and strategic decisions would be made in a democratic manner, with each of the generals having equal power. The Athenians immediately reached out to their Spartan allies, seeking to combine their forces when meeting the Persians. The Spartans agreed to do their part and assist their ally, but unfortunately they could not send a force immediately, as there was a major religious festival currently being held in the city. They would mobilize their troops only after the end of the festivities. The Athenian generals had no choice but to start devising a course of action without involving the Spartans. They were going to make a risky move in an attempt to surprise their enemy. Instead of staying to defend their capital, the Athenians marched towards Marathon with the intention of contesting the Persian landing and facing the Achaemenid army in an open field battle. Upon arriving at Marathon, the Athenians set up camp several kilometers away from the Persian positions, taking the higher ground and blocking the Achaemenid army's path towards Athens. At this point, both sides had advantages and disadvantages over each other. With the potential arrival of Spartan reinforcements, time was of the essence, and it was crucial for the commanders of each army not only to make correct tactical choices, but to also make them at the right moment. The Athenian army numbered 10,000 men, consisting of heavy infantry in the form of hoplites. Despite the ancient sources having high discrepancies in their descriptions of how large the Achaemenid force was, the modern consensus is that the fighting force under the command of the Persian generals was between 20,000 and 25,000 troops, only 1,000 of which were cavalrymen. But while the Persians had a clear numbers advantage, the Athenian army was arguably more well suited to face the Achaemenid force than vice versa. While the two armies were camped close to each other, neither side was willing to take the initiative for the first few days. But with the factor of a Spartan army potentially arriving on the battlefield at any moment, the Athenians knew that a Persian attack would come sooner rather than later. The Athenians had the upper ground in a good defensive position, but they had nothing to counteract the barrage of Persian arrows that would come with a Persian attack. This is why Miltiades came up with an unorthodox plan. He proposed that the Athenians take the initiative and charge, a move which the Persians would never expect. 4 of his fellow commanders agreed with this proposal, but 5 voted against, meaning there needed to be a tiebreaker in order for a decision to be made. In a cunning political move, Miltiades appointed an 11th commander, who unsurprisingly voted in his favor. The decision was made. The Athenians would do the unthinkable and attack. In order for the Athenian plan to work, there were a couple of crucial details which needed to be meticulously planned. Firstly, the hoplite lines needed to be thinned in order for the Athenian formation to match the numerically superior Persian line in width. Secondly, the attack had to be made while the Persian cavalry was as far away from the main force as possible, as even though it was small in numbers, it could still wreak havoc on the Greek formation. The hoplite formation of the Athenians was usually 8 lines deep, but for this battle it would be thinner in the center, so that the flanks could function at full capacity. The Athenians waited for a moment when the Persian horses were grazing several kilometers away from the main force and made ready for battle. Even though the Athenian charge caught the Persian commanders by surprise, the well-drilled and disciplined Achaemenid force managed to prepare for the attack just in time. The numerous Persian archers were deployed aboard the Persian fleet, a safe distance away from where the hand-to-hand combat would take place, while the most well-trained units of the Persian army, the so-called Immortals, were deployed in the center as per usual. The Athenians charged downhill, fully anticipating the upcoming volley from the Achaemenid archers. Once they got in range and arrows started raining down, the Athenian force sprinted towards the Persian line, clashing into it as hard as it could, all the while taking close to 0 casualties from the archers. The fighting was fierce and the Achaemenid force showed a great deal of discipline and grit, fighting head to head with the much better equipped Athenian hoplites. The thinned down Greek center almost broke, but the hoplites on the flanks managed to push the Persian force enough to rout them before the Athenian formation broke. The Persian cavalry arrived soon, smashing into the Greek rear, but the battle was already lost. The Achaemenid soldiers tried to flee back to their ships, many drowning in the process and taking heavy casualties. Miltiades' plan worked to a T, but the Persians were not done just yet. Having an almost fully intact fleet at their disposal, and the knowledge that the Athenian fighting force was at Marathon, the Persian generals were going to make a last attempt at taking Athens. The Persian generals regrouped their troops and ordered their fleet to set sails directly towards the Athenian capital. Miltiades and his generals, fully aware of the Persian plans, initiated a forced march in an effort to outspeed the much faster Persian ships. Thus began a legendary race of 42 kilometers, which would be forever immortalized as an athletic discipline bearing the name of the site where the battle took place. Utterly exhausted, the Athenians made the march back to their home city in less than 24 hours. Arriving in Athens, they were relieved to find no trace of the Persians. The Achaemenid fleet arrived only hours later, finding a fully fortified Athens, anticipating their arrival. Attacking the city was too dangerous at this moment. Darius and his men had no other choice but to sail back to their homelands to lick their wounds. The Greeks repelled the Achaemenid invasion successfully, but it was clear that it was only a matter of time before the Persians would return stronger and more vengeful than before.